Well, the kind of regulation they have in New York is really important. It's not just that it's hard to build a new building. They have really specific laws about how big an apartment has to be. And that kind of changes everything. So talk about the role that minimum standards play in affecting the mix of housing that's available in a city like New York. And then you talk about the, I think it's the Chambre du Bon in Paris. And talk about how that opportunity to allow flexibility is so important. And you can react to that long speech as well any way you want. Sorry for that long.
No, not at all. Well, yes, you see, households make a choice, make trade-off between the quantity of floor space they want and the location and the time commuting. And that's their choice. As soon as the regulator wants to be nice with those households by saying, no, you would like to live in the center of Manhattan, but in 30 square meter, but in fact, you will be much better off if we impose developer to build at least 60 square meter, and not less. So as soon as they do that, they of course eliminate a large number of people who cannot afford those 60 square meter. This is not the only thing which create constraint in New York or San Francisco. It's not only regulation, those minimum apartment size. You have all sorts of zoning which do not allow for instance, in Manhattan, you will not allow housing in some area which are still considered manufacturing for some reason, although there is practically no manufacturing left in Manhattan. But in Soho, for instance, just the area, in Soho, you have several blocks which are manufacturing, and as there was no demand for manufacturing in those blocks, you will have to be crazy to try manufacturing in this area of New York. There were a number of artists were located there because there were those empty buildings, and they were not squatters. They paid the rent to the owner, but it was illegal. At the same time, the city realized that those artists, it was embarrassing for New York City to kick out artists from loft, former industrial loft, which were empty. So they decided not to change the zoning. Instead of saying, well, this area is excellent for housing, why don't we allow housing to be built there? They say those artists who can demonstrate that they work there, they will have to send a portfolio of their work to the city. It's still there, by the way, if you want to apply yourself as an artist in New York. I think my book gives the website where you can apply as an artist. And so they will send their portfolio. The city will decide if they are bona fide artists. And therefore, in the regulation itself, it says a certified artist will be assimilated to a small manufacturer and therefore will be allowed to live and work in this area. This is a complete absurdity, of course, which limit completely. By the way, that means also that those artists consume much more floor space than they should. If they wanted to consume that much floor space, they should go to Queens, or they should go to Long Island, or maybe New Jersey, and commute. There is no reason for having that. So, and that at the expense, let's say, of the school teacher, for instance, who is teaching in a school in Manhattan and cannot find possibly any house to live in except somewhere in Long Island or in New Jersey with an hour and a half commute one way. So you see, this is, I will say even that this is criminal, although I don't believe it's a conspiracy. I believe it's incompetence, Albert Hirschman used to say, not talking too much about zoning, but certainly not about zoning, but about many regulation or management rule, that we have a case where the weak are oppressed by the incompetent. And I think that this is exactly what is happening now in New York and and San Francisco and cities like that, or in Paris and London. The people who have relatively low income but have a regular job. The housing for people who have a regular job in the city should not be a problem. Housing for people who are in the streets, homeless, that's different. This is a social problem, and that's the city has to take care of them, with subsidy. This is a different thing. But for me, the test is if a school teacher who has a job who is absolutely indispensable for the working of the city cannot afford to live within half an hour commuting time from his or her school, there's something wrong with our system. And this something wrong is entirely due to regulation. There is absolutely no reason for it. You see a lot of numbers which are buried in the zoning code. For instance, in New York, every zone, for instance, one zone would be called R6, residential 6. And then there's a long line of parameters that decide what should be the dimension of things which are built in residential 6. And among them is a number, which is a number of square feet. This number of square foot is, in fact, you have to divide the total area of the building that you are allowed to build in this zone, divide it by this magic number, and that will give you the maximum number of dwelling units that could be built in this area. I challenge anybody to tell me what is the advantage of the city to establish this minimum number of dwelling. Maximum number of dwelling. The density of New York 80 years ago was practically double of what it is now. So it's not that our infrastructure cannot cater to more people. It's only a completely arbitrary number. And it limits, of course, the number of dwelling what can be done. The household size in New York now has decreased. Some 40 years ago it was again around 4.5. Now, if I remember well,
that's people per household.
People per household, yes. It's people per family. Let's say now it's about 1.2 or something like that. But this magic number I was talking about in the zoning code assume it is relatively large because it's assumed that you still have a relatively large family. So it obliges developer to build a relatively large apartment, because if not, they will run against this rule about the number of dwelling units per acres, which would be too high. In the New York Times, about a year ago, there was a very interesting article which was extremely well documented, which showed that in Manhattan, 40% of the building could not be built today, not because of a building code or fire safety, or regulation, safety, no, because there are too many apartments in those buildings already, too many dwellings. Because those buildings are too high, or because there are too many business in the area. Would you imagine some planners who have the knowledge to know what is the optimum number of business in Manhattan? Where does it get that? Where it comes from? And the problem is a bit like the problem we were talking at the very beginning of this talk about Algeria. All these numbers are in the building code, in the building regulation, and people assume that the numbers who are there have a reason. That somebody really smart that put this number there, and
an expert,
and nobody knows why they are there, but they say somebody must know, and therefore do not challenge them. They feel that here goes the neighborhood. If you change this number, maybe the something will collapse or something like that. It's not true. So I recommend really a regulatory audit, to get rid of all those regulations for whom we don't know what the reason is, or the reason was maybe valid 100 years ago, but not anymore.